Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me back here in the Commonwealth on a lovely rainy day. We've got a wee bit of a thunderstorm going on here. We're still at Warwick Homestead, and the weather's kind of matching what we've got here in Scotland, where it's also raining a lot, and we're supposed to be getting some hefty windstorms coming later tonight, so that's going to be fun. So today we're talking about water, we're talking about the water cycle, and the Commonwealth definitely has an active water cycle and definitely doesn't fit the definition of a desert. Unlike the capital Wasteland and the Mojave Desert, the rainfall here is quite a bit higher. As you can see, the seagulls are looking a bit soggy there. By and large, the climate in this area is pretty similar to what it was pre-war and what it is in the area in real life as well, aside from the radiation storms. It's also coastal, specifically the Atlantic coast. So we are essentially looking out over the Atlantic Ocean from here. So there's a lot of lakes, rivers. We've got the marshland to the south of Quincy as well, and radiation is ubiquitous to most of the fresh and ocean water because of the direct hits and because of all the stuff that's brought out of the glowing sea by the storms, which means that most of the natural water sources are contaminated and would require purification for safe consumption. Kind of like elsewhere in the wasteland, the animals have adapted to the radioactive water, the plants as well, particularly the mirelurks. And as you can see right there, we've got some mounds with mirelurk eggs right over there. So they have done pretty well in this area. The conditions seem to suit them, which is why they're all over the bloody place. So, it's kind of worked quite well for them. And we do have evidence of other aquatic life. You do find kind of baskets of fish heads and things and the dead kind of porpoise dolphin type creatures that you see occasionally, although not what that Brahmin is doing. We don't tend to see them alive at any point, but you do find them washed up on the shoreline on occasion as well. So there probably is still some other life out there in the ocean. How much it's actually changed from pre-war, we don't really know. But not all of the contamination came from when the bombs fell, so we're going to pay a visit to Lake Quannapowitt in the north. Here we go. So here is Lake Quannapowitt. And it's quite close to a few places, so you can actually see there, that's the General Atomics Gallerias, the kind of shop and mall that's run entirely by Mr. Handy's. But there's also a few other kind of industrial locations not too far away. So we've got the Mass Fusion Containment Shed. A little bit further down, so Saugus Ironworks, and that does kind of feed into this. So there's a few other kind of industrial places. Poseidon Energy isn't too far away. And neither is Corvega. Corvega's over here. So there's a few big kind of industrial factories and things not too far away from this lake. And it was a popular tourist destination before the war, so you've got a little pier there with picnic tables and stuff. There's a few boats dotted about, but the place was pretty badly contaminated even before the war, so there was an issue where the lake was polluted by radiation, heavy metals. So when we say heavy metals, we're talking about things like lead and mercury that, when ingested either over a long period of time or a large amount in one go, can be severely toxic. And many industrial companies were blamed for it, but it turned out to be that the contamination was coming from Mass Fusion, which is the one that's the nearest their containment shed, which is where all their kind of nuclear waste was supposed to be kept. But it somehow ended up in the lake. And we can actually see that this issue was being investigated. So in this little shack here, this little kind of monitoring station where they were monitoring the water quality, so we can have a look at the terminal. I can't remember if it's password protected. I might have already hacked into it before. But this terminal belongs to the Massachusetts Department of Natural Resources Water Quality Monitoring System. So the quarterly inspection is 10,976 weeks overdue. Understandable. But we can have a look at the incident reports first of all. So we'll go to the earliest one, which is the 1st of June 2077. So quarterly water quality assessment, containment levels 3 times prior readings, illegal dumping remains the most likely cause. Recommend closing the lake to the public and beginning a formal inquiry into the waste management practices of nearby heavy industry, General Atomics, Saugus Ironworks and Corvega. But they didn't close the lake, that didn't happen. So then just over 3 weeks later on the 25th of June, repeated water quality assessment per department request, contaminant levels have continued to increase. Recommend closing the lake, beginning formal inquiry, cancelling the mayor's fishing tournament. So essentially there was a 4th of July fishing tournament held at the lake every year, and it was sponsored by the mayor, and the General Atomics International company sponsored it as well. But because of the high levels of contamination in the lake, the water quality people were like, we shouldn't really be letting people near this lake. It's really serious. We need to close it. But the mayor said no. So the bass fishing tournament went ahead. So there's 4th of July 2077. So fishing tournament resulted in 27 reports of serious illness following contact with the water. 1 boat sank. Its 2 surviving crew members were treated for critical radiation burns. No fish caught. Lake Quannapout closed to the public until further notice. So kind of a, bolting the stable door after the horses run off kind of thing, that now, because people have actually been harmed, they're like, yeah, maybe we should close the lake. So nobody caught fish. Probably all the fish were dead. That would be the most likely explanation for that. But 27 people becoming ill and a boat sank, 2 surviving crew members, which kind of suggests that there were some people that did actually die in this situation. And the people that survived on the boat, they obviously would have ended up under the water and got radiation burns. So yeah, they finally agreed to close the lake. And it became a bit of a problem. And what happened is that there is a no, I don't know if I've picked it up already. I might have, which means I'll never ever find it because there's so many notes in this silly game and they just put them in miscellaneous and it's really silly. May have picked it up at some point, I'm not sure. But if I have no idea where I put it. Because it should be, I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be here on the desk next to the terminal. But the note essentially states that, on the back of the lawsuit on the 16th of July against the City of Boston by the people who were injured in the incident and the families of the people that died. So publicly, the city complied and told the monitoring station to preserve the records related to the fishing tournament. But in private, the city attorney, J. Richard Thorndike, ordered them to wipe the terminal. So it was a little kind of handwritten note at the bottom of the official letter that they sent to wipe the records off the terminal. Obviously, they did not, because we can read them now. And between this happening in July, obviously they finally decided to shut the lake to the public. But that's only 3 months? Near enough until the bombs fell. So it's not really enough time for them to even start cleaning up the lake. So we can actually see the water quality status on here. And it's pretty terrible. So radioactive contaminants, extreme. Heavy metal contaminants, extreme. Fecal contaminants, extreme. Yep, we're talking about poop again. Shouldn't be surprised at this point. Miscellaneous contaminants, extreme, and dissolved oxygen is moderate. But there's probably not any fish or anything in there to make use of that oxygen. Maybe the mirelurks and the bugs that tend to hang around here. And it's in excess of sensor tolerance, which means that it's basically so high that the sensors that detect the water quality can't cope to quantify it. So contact with this water may be hazardous to human health. So that's great. But obviously the incident with the fishing tournament proves that this was a problem before the bombs fell, because the mayor didn't want to lose face by admitting that there was a problem in the lake and cancelling the tournament. So he was just like, nope, we're doing it anyway. I don't care what you say. And it didn't really go well for anybody involved in that. And then, of course, they were like, okay, yes, we'll apologise. We'll keep the records so that we can make sure this doesn't happen again. And then they were just like, no, wipe the records. We're going to try and just kind of cover this up and hope it goes away. So not great. But it's an important thing because water, you know, as we know, it's life itself. Water's necessary. People and animals can't really live without it. But if it's dangerous and damaged, then there's going to be a problem. So there's another location that's worth visiting in relation to this here. So we're going to head over to Nahant. So we're now here and the rain has cleared up here, which is nice. So we've got a bit better visibility of the Atlantic Ocean. So where I live is somewhere way over there in the distance, across the pond. But yeah, we've got this place here, which is the Nahant Oceanological Society. So in here, this place, they have a little museum and the robots that spout the 2 amazing ocean facts at you. But one of the things that the people here were doing... Yes, that's amazing. Thank you. But yeah, there's a radstorm started as soon as I came in here. But essentially, they were researching and they study, obviously, the ocean. They study the aquatic life and all these things. So we can see...
That's it.
There we go. Jim Prescott. Yeah, so goals. So strive to save our oceans by researching the long-term effects of radioactive exposure on aquatic life and working with the community to raise public awareness. We believe that companies such as Poseidon, which they spelled wrong, and General Atomics have gone unchecked for too long, and that radical action is necessary to protect our world from a horrific future. So, noble goals. Unfortunately, the world had other ideas. And then they're going to shut down at the end of October because they're going to be in Monterey for the Aquatic Protection Symposium. So, yeah, big kind of convention, conference kind of a thing. Okay. Guessing that was the robot that knocked something over. Okay, there is another terminal in here with some of their research notes. Is that in here or is it somewhere else?
Approximately 70% information updated. Approximately 97% of all life on the planet is found in the sea.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure that is still the case. Maybe it's in a different building. Here we are. There might be mirelurks creeping around in here. Yep. Ah, there's the terminal. Right, just gonna deal with that. Here we go. This is the terminal I wanted to look at. So this is their research logs as well. And keys, the the key to get into the office and the safe and things. But the research logs is what we care about. So they were obviously studying the wildlife and especially the sort of fish and crustaceans because, you know, fishing industry is a big industry in this part of the world. So they want to keep an eye on things. So the first one is quite interesting, is the lobster growth. So this is insane. An increase in average mass by 14% in crabs and 12% in lobsters is not something to be celebrated. If this trend continues, the additional food necessary to sustain the shellfish population could lead to colony collapse. I've tried again to bring our findings about the growth and mutations to the press, and those assholes at JNN just took our findings and spun them into a story about how great shellfish season is going to be. So they are noticing that there is changes in the average size of crabs and lobsters, that there's mutations, that they are starting to change. And remember, this is before the bombs fell, so the press spun this story to be like, yeah, shellfish season's going to be great because everything we're catching is going to be bigger, which means it's going to be worth more money, and that, you know, that's obviously they're just trying to put a positive spin on it. But to me, this seems like there's early indications that the process of evolution, a mutation, the mirelurks were basically already developing before the bombs fell, and probably the bombs fell, the reduction in humans, allowing them to breed in greater numbers, and the radiation probably helped them along. But it does seem that, you know, changes were already happening to some of these species before the bombs fell. So because mutations and evolution, it's not something that happens quickly, as I've said that several times before. You know, it's not a case of, you know, like humans didn't evolve because an ape just had a baby that was a human baby. It doesn't happen like that. It takes several generations. It takes a long time. But there are factors that can obviously increase the rate of mutations, which makes it happen faster. But it does seem from this that something was happening to the shellfish population on the Atlantic coast before the bombs came along. So it makes me think that the mirelurks are potentially already kind of in development before the bombs came along. But they've also recorded some toxicity. So 14th month in a row, we've seen an increase in toxicity in barnacles, which is also spelled wrong, and cod. Somebody needed to proofread the terminal entries in this game because honestly, I keep spotting spelling mistakes. But anyway, so this raises the average month-over-month increase to 34% compared to those in the control tanks. We've tried contacting the Boston Port Authority, but they refused to take or return our calls. So again, they're noticing changes in the aquatic life in the harbour and the area, that there's toxins in the barnacles, there's toxins in cod. And barnacles are kind of filtration species, I believe. They do, you know, they kind of accumulate toxins potentially from the water over time. But in the cod as well, and again, cod is a fish that people eat, so it's one of the more common ones to be caught by the fishing industry, and if there's toxins, then that's potentially a problem. And even in the real world, you know, there is an issue with certain fish, you know, like mercury and lead can accumulate in fish species that we eat, like salmon. So it is important to kind of bear that in mind, that contaminating the water with these things is going to get into the food chain, because it's going to get into the fish that we catch and eat, as well as into the animals that also eat fish. And that way it can kind of get into the cycle and it can start to accumulate, which is a problem. And then the final note here is related to what we just talked about before coming here, which is the samples from Lake Quannapowitt. So they sent samples to the Oceanological Research in Nahant to verify their findings. So very strange. One of my colleagues sent us a sample from Lake Quannapowitt asking for independent, also spelled wrong, verification to compare against his findings. The radiation and toxicity levels are 15 times higher than the sample we had from last year. That's quite a big increase, I would say. And well over safe levels for people to be swimming. I sent a report back to him to confirm his findings. So again, you know, they took samples of the water and got another independent lab to verify the toxic levels and the problems. But that wasn't enough for them to say, no, we need to close this lake and do something about this. They were just like, no, we're still going to have the fishing tournament. The fact that they only waited until people were actually hurt and killed before they're like, oh yeah, maybe we need to do something about this. Which is interesting, but not really surprising. Sometimes people don't accept that they have to change things until they are literally smacked in the face with how much of a problem it is. Obviously, we know that there was some issues with water being contaminated, and that was a big problem even before the bombs fell and added yet more contamination to it. But we need to talk about potability. So that means water that can be drunk safely. Potable water is water that's clean enough to be safe to drink. And while the game does allow you to drink the ocean water, I believe this is just a limitation of the game system. In terms of, it would be quite difficult to define this water can be drunk, this water can't be drunk, because obviously rivers and lakes do feed into the ocean. That's the way the water cycle works, that's the way these geographical features work. But there's not been anything to suggest that there's a change in salinity, which is the salt levels of the ocean. And the amount of salt that's in the ocean is the reason that we can't drink seawater. So understanding the difference between saltwater and freshwater, the clue's in the name, but it's important to kind of understand. So the main salt that's in seawater is your standard NaCl, sodium chloride, same as table salt that you add to your food. There are other minerals and salts dissolved in the water, but sodium chloride is the main one, and that's what makes it taste salty. So the average concentration in the ocean is 3.5% or 35 grams per litre. Now, we do need a certain amount of salt in the body, and our body fluids are also salt water to a degree, but the concentration is much lower. So body fluid, including the plasma in our blood, is around 0.9% salinity or 9 grams per litre. So that's the normal. And you might hear or know people talking about electrolytes, or you might even drink, sports drinks that have electrolytes as well. And that's because when you lose water, you're often losing the salt as well, and your body needs a certain level of these salts, particularly sodium and potassium, in order to function. But the big difference is the concentration. So if someone is dehydrated and unwell, so someone that's been really sick and they haven't been able to keep fluids down and they're dehydrated, then they'll be given IV fluids, so they'll be given a drip, and one of the common ones that's used for that is known as normal saline, and it's the same concentration of the blood, which is 0.9%, so it matches the body's normal salt levels, electrolyte levels, which is what's called isotonic. So that means iso means it's kind of on the same level, so it's exactly the same amount of salt that what our body fluids normally have. So if it's lower than that concentration, it would be called hypotonic, which would be, for instance, if you use just water. So you can get sterilised water that you can put into a drip, but it's just water, so it's hypotonic to the plasma, which can dilute the salts and cause more problems potentially. But there potentially are situations where you'd want to use that. And then hypertonic, which means it's higher than the body's normal salt level. So when someone's dehydrated, you want to use isotonic solutions, because if you dilute the electrolytes in their blood, it can be bad. That is why water poisoning is a thing. So if you have too much pure water with no electrolytes in it, then it dilutes the electrolytes in your blood. And your body, your muscles especially, need sodium and potassium to function, including the one that's currently beating inside your chest and keeping you alive. Remember, the heart is a muscle, a very important muscle, and if electrolyte levels are too low or too high, it can cause problems with the heart rhythm, and that can obviously end quite badly for you. The good thing is your body's prepared for this, knowing how essential these different things are for the function. Your kidneys and different parts of your brain and your endocrine system and things, they do a really good job of managing your water and electrolyte levels and keeping what the body needs in a tightly controlled range. But when something goes wrong, that's altered and the body starts to struggle, and that's where medical intervention might be needed. And there are situations where, in a medical setting, you might want to actually give a hypertonic saline solution to someone. Generally, that is if you want to take excess fluid out of the cells into the blood, which is osmosis. I'm sure most of you guys have, if you've done any kind of basic science, you know what osmosis is. So where water moves from the lower concentration of salt to the higher concentration of salt to dilute it and equalise it. So you might want to use something like hypertonic saline, which ranges between 3 and 7%. If someone had a brain injury that resulted in swelling, hypertonic saline can reduce that swelling and reduce the pressure, the intracranial pressure, which can improve the outcome. Or if you have someone that has severe hyponatremia, which is low sodium, you have to use it with caution though, because if you increase the blood pressure too much or too quickly, that can also be harmful. So this kind of thing is generally only done in hospital situations and intensive care units where you've got, nurse and staff that can monitor the patient very closely and keep an eye on their bloods and keep an eye on their heart rate and their ECG and all that kind of stuff, because you can overcorrect and cause more problems. And that's where the seawater comes into this discussion, before I get too far into kind of internal medicine lecture, because seawater is hypertonic, which means that drinking it will increase the sodium levels and lead to hypernatremia, which is going to overload the kidneys, it's going to cause dehydration, and it's going to make things worse rather than better. And you might think that's kind of bonkers, that drinking water from the sea makes you more dehydrated, but that's why, is because you're increasing that salt level in your body, and your body then is going to lose water to try and dilute that electrolyte down to a better level, and that's going to make the body dehydrated, which can obviously then progress into, potentially serious consequences. It's also, salt water can be an emetic, which means something that makes you vomit. Because it's a high level of salt, it's toxic, the body can identify this is too much salt, this is too much, this isn't good for us, and reject it. And of course, vomiting also makes dehydration worse because you lose fluid that way. So again, no matter how desperate you are and dehydrated you are, drinking seawater will make the problem worse rather than better. So the phrase water, water everywhere but not a drop to drink is very much true when it comes to the ocean. That phrase kind of comes in the context of being stranded on an island in the middle of the ocean. That's the problem, is that you're surrounded by all this water but you can't drink it because it'll kill you faster, which is obviously not ideal. So fresh water should be drinkable too. So if we maybe let's head back to the lake. Where is it? Yeah, we'll head back to the lake. There we go. So fresh water like this lake, obviously we know this one's heavily contaminated, so I'm not going to recommend drinking from it. But it should be drinkable, but there is contaminants as well. So radioactive debris, heavy metals, as we've already discussed, and also infectious agents. So parasites, like some protozoal parasites like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, which I give a 0 out of 10, do not recommend. I do have a plushie Giardia, right enough, which I got at a vet conference a couple of years ago, which is really cute. But yeah, don't recommend these things. We've got E. coli, Salmonella, your kind of classic food poisoning bacteria, and Shigella. So shigellosis is one that anyone that's played the Oregon Trail would know, because it's commonly referred to as dysentery. Also 0 out of 10, do not recommend. And another one that I feel goes forgotten more often than it should, which is leptospirosis. It's a nasty infection. which can be caught from animal urine. So it's quite common to find in rat urine. Rats are a known carrier of lepto, but other animals can carry it too. And dog meat's also at risk of lepto, so dogs can get leptospirosis and it can make them very sick, which is why we do vaccinate for leptospirosis. I have seen I've definitely one confirmed case of leptospirosis that I've treated, and it can make people and dogs very seriously ill with liver and kidney failure. The one that I saw was jaundiced, so we knew that the liver was unhappy and confirmed that it was leptospirosis, so liver and kidney failure. And again, being unwell with these kinds of things also is going to make your fluid loss worse. So it's going to exacerbate the dehydration. It just ends up being a disaster, really. The good news about all of this is that this game does feature water purifiers, and not only that, but you can build them in all your settlements, or most of your settlements. If your settlement has a source of water in the area, you can build a water purifier, which will make it pure and safe to drink. And there's a few different ways that you can clean up water to make it safe to drink. You can filter it, so that's good, especially for getting large kind of particles out of it. You can pass the water through a filter that'll catch anything that you don't want there. And obviously the finer the filter, the more stuff it's going to catch. You can boil it, and that'll kill the majority of pathogens in the water. You can distill it, so you can heat it up and collect the water vapour and cool it down again, and that removes salt, removes a lot of other stuff out of it. And you can use chemical treatment as well. So swimming pools, the majority of people use chlorine in the swimming pools. Controls algae in outdoor swimming pools, but it also helps kill pathogens that swimmers might be carrying. So people can be carrying all kinds of bacteria and viruses on their bodies that aren't making them ill, but it can get into the water, and if that builds up, it can start making people sick. So chlorine helps combat that. For drinking water, a few drops of iodine can work pretty well as well. You can get activated carbon filters, which are quite good for filtering stuff out of water. I used to have a water fountain for the cat. I had to stop using it because she likes to play with running water, and she was just flooding the place and making a mess. But it did come with these kind of carbon filters that helped keep the water clean and catch any gunk, or any, even like sort of dirt and contaminants and things. It helped keep the water cleaner, which was quite useful. You can get technology that allows desalination, so that's removing the salt from water, such as machines that can perform reverse osmosis. So that way you can actually make seawater drinkable by taking the salt out of it. And using a combination of methods is the best way, and you can obviously create machines that can do that for you. So because this technology kind of exists, settlements can do pretty well with a water purifier. Diamond City has one, although you do have to buy the water. But, we live in a post-capitalist society in Fallout where people are still out to make a bit of money however they can, which is respectable, but it's not that unusual. I mean, in the real world, water isn't provided 100% for free, certainly not here in the UK. So I obviously live in Scotland, where we do pay something towards the water provision and the sanitation infrastructure, the mains water supply and sewage and all that kind of stuff. And it's paid alongside council tax, which is a annual tax on properties that cover maintenance of local infrastructure, so the roads and public services and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of paid for through council tax. The amount you pay is based on where you are and the kind of value of your house within a certain range. So there's different bands. So the bigger the house you have, generally the more you'll pay in council tax. And water charges are also included in that. So in Scotland, the water's managed by a nationalised company called Scottish Water, so that's entirely they do all the water and sanitation infrastructure in Scotland. It's different in England. I believe there's different companies for different locations. I know in London they're called Thames Water. It's kind of done differently there. I think some places have meters for water usage and you pay based on how much you use and stuff like that. It's different in different parts of the world, but I say and I'm only familiar with it in Scotland because that's where I've lived most of my life. I have both rented and owned property, so even if you're renting, you're still responsible for the council tax and water charges unless the landlord includes it in your rent and they pay it. But generally, it's the tenant, the person that lives there, that's responsible for those charges. And I have also owned property in Scotland, and would obviously had to take responsibility for all that as well. So you could argue that water should be readily available to all because it's an essential physiological need, and it is something that's available in the sense that you can find it without necessarily having to pay any money, but you do have to pay for the upkeep of the system through your council tax and things like that. But Scottish Water do actually, they have water fountains where you can refill water bottles in a lot of places for free. They're just out there on the street and you can refill your water bottles for free. Having good water is something that Scotland in general is quite proud of. Our tap water is really good. For the most part, the waterways are kept pretty clean and things, so it is something that we do take pride in as a nation, especially when so much of it kind of falls from the sky all the time. We get a lot of rainfall here, but yeah, so it's an important thing. But you can see from what happened here that there was a lot of kind of political nonsense going on and some shady, underhanded kind of disposal of waste and things, which you can kind of see not very well because the water's not very clean, so it's very hard to see through. But yeah, there's radioactive waste barrels and everything down here, so there was some shady stuff going on in some of the waterways in the Commonwealth even before the bombs fell. In an incident that results in an unknown number of people dying, 2 people that ended up in the water getting radiation burns, which is bonkers, and then 27 other people becoming unwell. That's not a small incident. That's quite a serious one. But it was only when something like that happened that the authorities and the powers that be were like, yeah, we might need to do something about this. But they got sued anyway and lost. So make of that what you will. So hopefully you guys find that interesting. I say it's really cool to dig into some of all this kind of stuff. And the fact that we've got these kind of stories that show what happens when we don't take care of our water systems. Is that a cave? I have never seen that before. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the background again, but I don't remember noticing that before, and I might be going crazy, but let me see what's up here. Oh, it's just a little kind of indent. It doesn't go anywhere. But yeah, so we need to look after our waterways, we need to look after our natural resources, because if we don't, then bad things happen, is the takeaway. But there's not really a shortage of water in any capacity in the Commonwealth. It's just that most of it's not really clean and could do with having a water purifier, but at least you're able to build them in this game, so that kind of mitigates that issue. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. I will be back on Tuesday with another interesting location in the capital Wasteland, and next Saturday we're going to talk about the food chain in the Commonwealth. So that's going to be fun. Again, there's more species than ever, so the chart's going to be bigger and better than the previous ones, hopefully. I'm going to be starting to put that together today and get that ready for you guys. I'm quite excited about that one. It's going to be interesting, I think. So hopefully you'll come back for that. As always, love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll catch you guys next time. Bye.